Hey everybody, welcome to episode 21 of Building Jam. Today our guest is Zach Lloyd, who's the CEO and the founder at Warp. And in this episode, we talk about how they ship features, how engineers drive product, and the secret behind it, and how to grow as a developer company. So let's get into it.
We brought you here to get your advice. We love what you're doing. On this podcast, you know how founders do these advice conversations? Usually they're off the record. And so we're like, what if we
Okay.
learn, but then we also share the learnings with all the people building using Jam. And so that's what we're doing here. I think one of the things that we admire most about Warp is you've just built a product that devs love so much. And we wanted to learn more about what happens behind the scenes. How do you do that? How do you talk to the team about quality bar? What does the design process look like? Discovery process? We want to hear everything.
Cool. I'm down.
Okay, you've built a product developers absolutely love and rave about. What's the most important thing you do internally to achieve such a great effect?
Okay, that's a good question. I think so. It kind of starts with culture, I would say, and with we have a kind of core value around if we're building something, it should be solving some user problem, which sounds, I think, very obvious. But it's I don't know, in my experience as an engineering manager, there have been many times in my career where it's kind of why are we building this thing? What problem is it solving? And also different types of people are kind of motivated by different things. We've tried to be very product focused as kind of company ethos. It's part of how we hire people. We wrote up this big public thing called our How We Work, which is on our Notion. It's linked off our website, where one of the ways that we've tried to differentiate ourselves with the team and the product is by we're always going to be product focused. And it's even one of the kind of part of the core thesis of the company actually is that developer tools traditionally have not been built at the same sort of level of product quality as consumer tools or even other B2B tools. And one of the things that got me excited in working on Warp to begin with was just there's I thought there was an opportunity to build a company around consumer grade developer tools. And so that's when that's the company thesis and that's how you're hiring, it's kind of natural that in the development process, we're always focusing on hey, is this solving some user problem? Are users going to like this? And so that's kind of the short answer. One caveat I would say is not everyone loves everything we do. That's also okay. There's some controversy around Warp. There's things that we're missing in the product. So we're trying our best though at every stage to build something that users love, and that's pretty ingrained.
I'm curious, how does a feature come to life? These collaboration feature you're about to launch.
Yep.
What happened? Who wrote the spec? How does it all happen?
Yeah, so I guess a couple things. So we're fortunate to be working on a product in a problem domain where we all use the product every day and use the prior version of the product as well, use other terminals. And so when we're building for ourselves, that actually is really helpful from a product development standpoint of we have as users a decent sense of what are the typical problems with the existing product, the existing workflows people do in the terminal. So that's one source of just where does an idea come from? It's a lot of the times it comes from within the team. Now that doesn't work perfectly for every kind of feature. So, there are other developers in the world who are not on the Warp team who experience other kinds of problems that we don't necessarily experience. There are buyers who we're trying to build for also who are not just end users, although I would say Warp is very, very heavily focused on building for developers and not building for CTOs or CIOs or something like that. But, we want to understand what are the problems that sort of engineering managers might have or heads of developer productivity. And so for those types of things, we go kind of outside in a bit more where we try to talk to those people, and you could do it through user interviews. We have thousands of open GitHub issues where our users are sort of telling us what they want, which is great signal. We do a bunch of surveying, we get NPS responses, we reach out to power users, we have a big Discord. So we sort of take all of those signals and decide, hey, here's like a problem that we want to solve. I think that framing is actually important. It's like, I wouldn't frame it as here's a feature we want to build. That's usually, or could be, a mistake because that sort of presupposes a solution. So we really like to start with the problem and make sure we have a very, very clear sense of like what's wrong. And the problem could be, I mean, as simple as like, oh, as a developer, I waste a lot of time because I can't find the right command to run, and I know someone else on my team has run it. And then it starts, if we have a good grasp on the problem, I think we then kind of move into more of like a solution mode. And like more nuts and bolts, the way this works is for most of the problems that we solve at Warp, there's an engineer who is sort of the point person on the product side, who is actually, working with a designer or working with the PM or talking to users, but it's really the engineer who is the lead and is putting together a sort of like proposal for a solution. There's a whole process around that. It's like often we will write a PRD. Almost always we will create sort of mocks and designs in Figma. Everything will get kind of built in public is a big part of it, so that as we build it, we want to make sure that we are actually solving the problem and staying aligned on like, are we building the thing we thought we were going to build? It'll go to dog food. It's a really key thing. If it's not adding value or working well for us internally, we'll probably iterate on it until we all find it to be a valuable feature. And then it will kind of go out in the public, and then we'll do a whole sort of round of like, is it being used the way we thought it was going to be used? Are we getting positive signal from users? Are we getting, do analytics show that people are engaging with it, and so on?
I'm curious about something where you said like you're talking to customers and you're trying to figure out, okay, like you mentioned about when we grasp the problem, that's when
Yeah.
we write a spec or write a PRD to work on it. Um, as a former engineer and a product person, like when I talk to customers and I'm like, man, okay, I understand this problem. Like I can't wait to go into solution mode.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's not the right thing immediately. Sometimes it works, but how does grasping the problem manifest? Like, what does that mean? How do you quantify that, or how do you know that okay, this is the thing that we need to go build?
Yeah, it's a great question. So sometimes people will just tell you I have this problem. Oftentimes people will start describing solutions they want. Like users are not kind of shy about suggesting solutions. Usually we don't want to just like blindly build the solution that's been suggested by a user. But if enough people are suggesting solutions or pointing to solutions in other products that are kind of like in this space, I think that's really good signal that there's a problem here. We try to just like very directly state what we think the problem is in terms of like user stories. Like, as a user, I want to, quickly find command that another person on my team has run so that I can do my job more quickly. As a user who's in a firefight, it's really important from a timing perspective that that information is available to me. As a user, like who's doing something on production, it's really important that I am executing the correct command and not an incorrect command, because the consequences of doing the incorrect one could be really bad. And so we try to like list it out from a user's perspective, like, well, what are they trying to achieve and why? And we really try to, like, if we're doing like a product design jam or something like that, we try to be pretty segregated in terms of like, can we actually say the problem and say the different facets of the problem before we even start to get into the land of like, oh, well, again, just to go back to my example, well, one solution for that might be like, let's have like real-time terminal sharing, and that way someone else can look at your command and correct it. Or another solution might be like, hey, let's have like shared command snippets in the terminal so that you don't even need to have someone else available when you want to solve the problem. Or a third solution might be, hey, you should just be able to ask AI about your team's entire knowledge base, and it can return the right answer and tell you why it thinks that's the answer. And so I think if we didn't do the problem statement first, we would just be at higher risk of building something that sounds cool, but maybe doesn't actually solve the underlying problem. Which, by the way, we still make this mistake all the time. So I want to be very clear that we do not do this perfectly, but like, I think from a general product development perspective, it is really good practice to just try to really, really state and validate the problem before you get into like the land of like solutions.
I love the specificity of those statements. Like it's
Yeah.
so niche, but so right and so cool to hear. Hey, I was curious about something you said. You said like for every feature, there's an engineer who's the point person, and they work with the PM and with the designer. How
Yeah.
are those? Who owns what? What are the different responsibilities?
Yeah. So typically, if like, I'll just tell you how the whole team is organized. So we have sort of like four product areas within Warp that are like, I'll tell you what they are. One is around fixing the core terminal. That's our core team. One is AI, and one is collaboration, and one is what we call revenue and experimentation. Each of these areas has like literally its own mission statement. So it's like the collaboration mission statement is something like make Warp the best place for developers to work together to ship software more quickly. The intelligence one is something like make Warp the terminal that best leverages AI to help developers ship software more quickly. It all kind of ladders up to our overall mission, which is empowering developers to ship better software more quickly. So we have those, and those are like standing teams. When we start to do a project, what we do is we spin up something called a pod, and a pod is a group of engineers who are working on a time-bounded shippable thing. And so that could be like, what's a good example of that? It could be like we're working on this feature that's introducing collaborative environment variables, and so that had like a pod. The pod will have a lead who is the DRI, and by DRI directly responsible individual, and that person ultimately is responsible for like, is the thing that we're shipping having a positive impact on users, is kind of like the key of the role. And so often, almost always, but not always, that pod lead is an engineer. And for us, we're like a little unique, I think, in like some places you'll see the PM really be the DRI. At Warp, it's much more often is the engineer. And the PM will do like a sort of supporting role where they'll help shape the feature. They'll try to help validate the feature by talking to users. They'll line up trusted testers or teams to test out the feature. They'll work to make sure we're gathering the right data around like, is the feature being launched correctly? But it's really the engineer who's building the thing, and I think it aligns the incentives best for the person who's building it to be the person who is responsible for whether it's having the impact it's supposed to have. And so the engineer will be the driver. They'll work with the designer to make sure that the mocks are solving the problem. They'll work with the PM to make sure like that the problem is validated. They'll build it. Sometimes there'll be a few engineers building it, and you'll have one engineer who's like the quarterback for that. They'll figure out the rollout plan, and they'll launch it and be responsible for making sure it had the impact. That's how we do it. We've experimented with different things, but that setup has been working pretty well for us.
I mean,
So
that's
it's like
pretty
the
unusual
PM.
setup.
Oh,
Like, how
sorry.
do you? I,
Go, go,
I was
go.
just saying that it's a pretty unusual setup, and like, how do you keep them accountable? Because it is very different.
It's different. It goes back to like who comes to work at Warp to some extent. Like, again, I don't think this is a system that every engineer is going to like. Like, I've worked with engineers in my career who would rather sort of PM be the driver, and like kind of would rather I don't like be like kind of handed a spec of a thing to build, and the engineer is the implementer, and like the designers the designs it, and the PM makes sure the whole thing goes right. I Again, I think I'm like an outlier in this. I feel like that can lead to results where the person building the thing doesn't feel ultimate responsibility, and like I've seen issues where engineers like we'll build something and it'll look like crap, and they'll be like, but that's the spec. And it's like, well, that's like, if you view your responsibility as building the spec rather than getting the outcome, then like you have a different amount of accountability. And so I don't know, I feel like it works best to have the engineer be accountable for the outcome, since they're the one actually building the thing. I think this only works at Warp because who we hire. And so as part of our like interview process, for instance, we do like, it's essentially a PM interview for every engineer, where they have to like propose a couple features in Warp. They have to trade those features off against each other. They have to lead a product brainstorm with other people on the team. So I don't think it's very atypical. And then I think it works for us in large part because we're the users of the product. And so there's like we can kind of understand if what we're building is solving the problem in a way that, like, I don't know, if I was working on like accounting software or something, it would be very weird to have the engineers be like, no, this is what I like for this accounting software. It's like, you really need the external validation and feedback. Whereas for like the terminal, it kind of aligns incentives the best way. At least that's my hypothesis.
Wait, so every engineer you hire, you put them through a PM style interview?
Correct. Yes.
That's
Pretty much everyone at the
that's
company, by the way, has
bonkers.
gone through some version of this.
Wait, so is it
Yeah,
twice as
like,
hard for you to hire engineers? Because they have to be good at engineering and product?
yeah, it's like we don't hire that many. And yeah, they have to be very good at engineering, and they have to, I don't know if they like yeah, they have to convince us that they're going to be like good at working on product, and sort of doing some things that are more often PM. Like, again, I would say this attracts awesome engineers to me. Like the best engineers that I've worked with in my career are the ones who are always thinking about, like, why am I building this? Is this solving a real problem? Is this working in a way that's really good? And so, and it's also, those are also my favorite engineers to work with. Whereas conversely, the engineers who I, as a manager, have had who I would say I don't like working with as much, are the ones who are just like, well, the thing said to build it like this, so I'm building it like this. Or it's engineers who are like extremely focused on the, like, how it's built, to the detriment of like how the user experiences what's being built, right? Users don't use code, they use product. And so I find, again, like, I really want a developer who is like, what I care about at the end of the day is like, is this helping solve someone else's problem? And I want to caveat that because, like, I've been kind of yelled at on Hacker News for this. That doesn't mean that I don't care about the code quality or how something is built. Like, I often find, again, that the best engineers um, understand that good coding practices lead to the best product outcomes, and therefore they are very concerned about that and like advocate for it. Those things are not really in tension, to me at least. But there is a certain kind of engineer who I find like tends to really like the coding and the API and am I using the right toolkit and framework, but doesn't care about the end product. And that's like the kind of that's like an anti pattern for who I want to
There,
work with. Yeah.
Zach, there's a theme here.
Yeah.
I was listening to one of your interviews from like 2 years ago, and I'm paraphrasing here. Like, you're talking about the mission of the company, and really about building the product. How when your users use the product, you want them to feel happy about it,
Yeah.
and that is something really like interesting. So I'm curious, like, of course, giving engineers a lot of this responsibility and giving these teams mission statements sort of like assure that, hey, this is how, when people use our product, this is a certain kind of emotion that they will feel. Like, how do you then, how, for to be very trendy right now, how do you go
Yeah.
like founder mode and bring that in as well?
Wait, what does founder load mean?
No, founder mode.
Oh, founder mode. Oh, sorry. Okay, I guess a couple things. So I use the product pretty much every day, which again is like if you're going to be founding a company, I highly recommend it be a thing that you use. And so I'm probably the biggest, loudest complainer when there's something in the product that I feel like has regressed or not working right. I probably file the most bugs and like nag people the most. So I don't know. There's like an obsession there. There's a surfacing the voice of developers who are using the product to our team. Um, we have to constantly do that. We have to do it even for the when people are complaining, or maybe especially when people are complaining. Like we do something at our team meeting where every week we read like the detractor NPS comments, and they could be pretty mean. Like like developers are really opinionated about this stuff, so that like that people are sometimes dropping f bombs in these detractor comments, and like, but it's like it's important for us to feel the pain of the user, not just like pat ourselves on the back for like, hey, when someone says that they like something, which we also by the way read the positive ones. We're not just like we're not just torturing ourselves. So I think surfacing the voice of the user is one of the biggest things. We're like pretty data driven at this point, meaning like we look a lot at retention, we look a lot at NPS score. We have kind of we're fortunate enough that we have like enough scale now where it's like those are meaningful. And so yeah, like if users aren't happy, the team should feel that. And if they are happy, they should feel it too. So I think that's the biggest thing that we try and do. And starting with ourselves, like again, if we're all using it, that's such a huge advantage. If we don't like it, probably other people won't.
Ertify used to every Monday show us all the uninstall reports, like the whole company, and go through every single one, like the brutal honesty of them. And actually, at this point, the
Yeah.
engineers just do it on their own. Like he doesn't need to present them; they're reading every single one. So it's brutal, but we agree. Like companies closest to the truth win. Zach, I have a question. um, at every company, like quality means something different, velocity means something different. We're always trying to like align everyone on like what is quality to ship, like what is ready to ship mean, and like how much extra time is worth spending, and to be able to like make those decisions on trade-offs all the time. Like we have a sort of like an internal spend 25% of the time it took to build the thing to polish the thing, um, sort
Okay.
of as like how much time. How do you talk about like trade-offs between velocity and quality internally? Like how do you sort of message that to the team?
This is a hot topic right now. I mean, I think it's always a hot topic. Um, so we have like a I don't know, for lack of a better word, like a rubric that I wrote up. Again, that's posted publicly. It's called Building Fast versus Building Right. Um, and so the short answer is I think it depends on the thing that you're working, like for us at least, the part of the app that you're working on. And so, for instance, um, if you're building something that is like you have high conviction is going to be around for a long time, that's a core part of the experience, um, that is very frequently used by developers. I think, and there's a whole list of things that are kind of like that. Like the quality bar needs to be really high. Like we don't have like a 25% polish time or something, but like we're gonna engineer it right. We are going to bug bash it. So part of our process, we do bug bashes before anything goes out, and we're just going to have like hey, this is a core part of the app. It needs to be really high quality. On the other side, we have things that we consider experimental. So if something is experimental, we don't know if we want to keep it, then I think we want to build it more quickly. Things that are closer to the UI. So again, there's like a coding, like if something is like at the data model level or really deep in the stack, or you're making a choice about what technology you're going to use, if there's a lot of dependencies that flow from the decision, then that argues for doing it correctly. If you're closer to the UI, that is something where we're often comfortable with like, let's try something, see what the initial feedback is. Let's build it quickly. If you're in an area of the app where time to market is really, really like important. And I would say like for us, that's the AI features right now. Like, like innovating on like the core terminal is going like at whatever pace, but the pace of innovation in developer space with AI features is like insane. And so I think we want to have a little bit more of a bias there towards like, let's get it out, let's get feedback, let's iterate quickly. So I don't think it's one size fits all. And like the word that we use internally all the time for this is just trying to be pragmatic. Um, and we do, but it's that doesn't mean it's free for all. Like we do have this like thing that we wrote up in our how we work, which again, I think it's one of the more interesting things about Warp. Is like we try to document all of these frameworks and stuff that we put together, and so there is like a rubric that we use for this, and it has a bunch of trade-offs.
I'm curious. So Warp now is about like 50, 60 people.
Not that big. We're like not even 40 people.
So Jam right now, we're 18. Product has been live for
Cool.
2 years. I think you all have been live for like about 3, 4.
Yeah, I think we're like the company is like 4 years old, and I think our product is like 3 years, something like that.
So we're a 4-year-old company, 2-year-old product, 18 people, 140,000 users. Can you take us back to when Warp was a jam stage and jam sized company and what that was like at the time? And like, what was the makeup of the team? And what do you remember from that time?
That was probably like a year and a half ago. So we're not like that. We're not that far different from you. Like we've probably doubled our headcount and user base and that type of stuff. So what was different then? I don't know. Honestly, like we have not grown our headcount at an explosive rate, and I think that has helped us like maintain our culture. So like looking back to then, like I think our culture was basically was very, very similar. We have some new functions at the company. Like we have a sale. We hired our first salesperson. We have a little bit more of a developed growth and marketing team than we had. Like at that time, it was. I think we had I think our product marketer had joined, but it was like maybe right around then. And so, before then, I'm not sure how you all approach growth and marketing, but it was really me and our founding one of our like first engineers, Michelle, who I think you might know Michelle. So we just did like a lot of the different functions on our own. Still at that point, most of the team was still just like engineers, and you know, I think a year and a half ago, like I don't know, I think we had a little bit of a growth team, but a little bit before that, Michelle and I would do all the launches. We would do like the website changes and all that stuff. And I think we've definitely matured some of these other functions outside of product and engineering over the past, year and a half.
Gonna be really selfish here because I work on this function right now. You
Yep.
said you hired your first salesperson. What does go to market from like the revenue side, so like sales, customer success, support, like look like right now?
Yeah. So we like our motion is like bottoms up PLG, like product led growth type motion. And so our strategy has been get Warp in the hands of a lot of developers at a lot of companies, and we've been pretty successful at that. And honestly, like our salesperson has been at the company for 2 months, and before we hired our salesperson, Michelle and I were sort of doing this. But the motion is something like try to find companies that have engaged users of that user base. Try to find like the most engaged ones who might be willing to sort of champion or introduce us to someone who could potentially buy Warp, talk to that person, convince them that there's value in a larger portion of the team having it, maybe do a proof of concept where we run it, where we help onboard them, set them up, and then hopefully convert them into paying customers. We also have a self-serve option, which is which is, again, it's only a couple months old, but it's actually like it's driving decent revenue. Where as a prosumer, like as an individual who wants like higher AI limits, or as a small team that wants to use our collaboration features, they can pay on credit card. And so those are the two strategies that we're following right now. Did that answer your question?
It does. Love it. Like
Okay.
we're basically like at around like the same stage where we're doing these things. So it's really
Yeah.
interesting to hear that from you as well.
Okay, I have one last podcast question. What advice do you have for us or like startups like us building this developer tool space? Like any lessons learned? You're like, this is my parting wisdom.
What seems like this is like a thought on growth, um, which is that what seems to work best for growth for us, and what I see working for other developer companies, is that the most important thing is not to talk about yourself, but to have other people talking about you, showing off your product. Like that just seems to be like the key for like a PLG developer company is, can you get on platforms that people care about, whether it's Twitter or YouTube, Hacker News, Reddit, whatever, can you get an engaged community of like people who love your product to vocally like talk about it on your behalf? That seems to work way better than like the company itself talking about its product. Like that's just like a random thought, and like something that we're thinking about a bunch on the growth side, and something that I see working really well for some companies, and it's worked somewhat well for us, is just like, how can you, if assuming you have a product that people love, which I think is the first step, which I think you all have, I think Warp has as well, how do you kind of encourage or incentivize people who love your product to help spread it? Because I think that's the most effective way to grow it.
Irfan, any last questions or?
Yeah,
Zach, this is so
thank you all
awesome.
for
Thank you so
having me.
much.
Yeah, I really appreciate you all taking the time. This was a fun conversation.